is over. Father, thank you so much for you. I thank you for each person that's here. And I know that you brought them here. It's a beautiful morning. It's been a beautiful weekend. They could have been doing any number of things. But Lord, because I believe you drew them, they chose to come here. And I pray that each person that has come will receive the blessing that you have for them. And I just ask, as we've been crying out all this morning, that Holy Spirit, you will continue to move even in greater measure as we look at your word for this morning. I believe a lot of people could be set free this morning as we move towards communion. So as always, I ask that you would fill me from the soles of my feet to the crown of my head. And I ask the words that I would speak would truly be your words and words of life. May you now be glorified, Lord, in these next several minutes. And I ask for this in Jesus' name. Most of us need not only second chances, but third chances and fourth chances and fifth chances. And I want you to know this morning that Jesus gives all of those chances to those who are truly repentant. But the question remains, what about us? How merciful are we to the people around us? Mercy is not natural to the human race. It's not natural to us. In fact, a man once wrote these powerful words. I and the public know what all school children learn. Those to whom evil is done do evil in return. The law of nature is this. There is no mercy. There is no forgiveness. Squirrels do not forgive cats for chasing them up a tree. Dolphins do not forgive sharks for eating their playmates. We live in a dog-eat-dog world, not a dog-forgive-dog world. Not too long ago in some Roman ruins, there was an archaeologist, and he uncovered various curses that were written in Latin on various tin placards. One of the placards read this: Docimedes has lost 2 gloves. He asked that the person who has stolen them should lose his mind and his eyes. You might say Docimedes has a vengeful spirit. That great theologian Irma Bombeck once prayed, Lord, if you can't make me thin, at least make my friends look fat. I think we can all kind of identify with that. Some years ago, the New York Times ran an article about crime in modern Japan. It was found that for every 100,000 citizens in the United States, 519 are in prison, are incarcerated. However, in Japan, only 37 are in prison, are incarcerated. And there was a New York Times reporter who was kind of intrigued by this, so he got permission to go to Japan and to do a little investigation. And there he interviewed a Japanese man who had just gotten out of prison. And this Japanese man had spent 20 years in prison for murder. And he said in those 20 years that he had been in prison, not one person had visited him. On the day that he was released, his wife and his son were there to meet him. And their message was very simple and very short. Never come back to this village, period. You might say that the Japanese culture, the Japanese society had learned how to harness the power of ungrace and unmercy. As early as preschool and kindergarten, our kids are tested and evaluated, and then they're put into a slot: advanced, normal, or slow. Of course, we wouldn't use the word slow today in our politically correct culture. We would use things like specially gifted or differently gifted or special needs. But the school tells you that the whole reason why they do this testing and evaluation is to prepare our children for the real world. The world of no grace and no mercy. And then there comes Jesus. What a breath of fresh air. And Jesus says in the 5th Beatitude in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 7, blessed, really happy, fortunate are those who are merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Now, mercy is something that we all want. In golf, it's called a mulligan. For those who are uninitiated to the game of golf, a mulligan occurs when a person like myself, who is a hack, takes a shot and the shot goes into the woods. And I say to my golfing buddy, I'll be taking a mulligan on that one. And my buddy says, right you are, Frank. And I go into my golf bag and I pull out a brand new ball, place it on a perfect line, reshoot that thing, boom, perfect shot. And it's as if the first shot never even happened. And because of the mulligan, I shoot par on every hole. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Now, you know what I found out? We all want a mulligan, but we find it very difficult to give mulligans. And Jesus says so in Matthew chapter 5, if you're his follower, blessed are you when you can give a mulligan, for then you shall receive a mulligan in return. That's putting it in modern day language. So what in the world is Jesus exactly talking about when he says to you and I, we must be merciful, because if we're not merciful, then we won't obtain mercy? What is he asking us to do? Is he asking us to feel sorry for people? For example, let's say after the service, we serve coffee, and I see Matt Malassi, one of our elders, go get a cup of coffee. And he's drinking his coffee, he spills it all over himself. And that wouldn't be too unusual for Matt. He suffers from clumsiness. And I see Matt doing that, so I come running over to him and I say, Matt, I feel so sorry for you. He must be really embarrassed about this. And then I kind of walk away. Is that what Jesus is talking about? Feeling sorry for someone is good. It's better than going to Matt and saying, hey, what a blockhead. You really embarrassed the eldership by this. But that's not exactly what Jesus had in mind. Jesus really isn't just talking about compassion here. Now, some of you might think, well, maybe Jesus is talking about kindness. And let's say, again, using the same storyline of Matt being clumsy, we see Matt after the service, and he goes and gets a cup of coffee, and he begins drinking it, and he pours it all over himself. He spills it all over himself, and I come running up to him, Matt, I feel so sorry for you. I just can't believe this. Must be really embarrassing for you. And then I go into the kitchen, I get some paper towels, and, and I clean them up, because Sue's not in town. She usually cleans them up, but, and so I clean them all up. And then I walk away. Is that what Jesus has in mind here? And the answer is no. Kindness is a good thing, but that's not exactly what Jesus is talking about when he says, blessed are you when you are merciful, for then you shall obtain mercy. Because what Jesus is talking about, he uses the word eleos. And eleos literally means to wipe out. The Greeks use the word eleos in terms financially of canceling, of literally wiping out a debt. So biblically, when Jesus is asking you to be merciful and me to be merciful, he's asking us to be more than just have sympathy, but he's moving to empathy. It's love in action. What Jesus is really asking us to do is to cancel a debt. to cancel a wrong done to us. Now get this is really the challenging part. And then he's asking us to do something good, beneficial to the person who has hurt us, done a wrong to us. Now that's a challenge, and that is not easy to do. Would you like an illustration of this? In Luke chapter 10, Jesus tells one of his most famous stories. It's the story or the parable of the Good Samaritan. Most of us know that story, and it starts out with there's a Jewish man, and he's traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, Jericho, between Jerusalem and Jericho, was what is known as the Jericho Road, and it was a brutal stretch of road. The reason why is there was rocks and there were cliffs that were lining both sides of the road, and it was extremely dangerous because thieves and bandits and robbers would be hiding behind the rocks and in the caves, and they would often attack people. And Jesus tells us as there is this Jewish man, he is, walking the Jericho Road, and sure enough, some thieves and some robbers come out, and they beat him, and they strip him, and they rob him, and they leave him for dead alongside of the road. And there he is. He's just bleeding, dying. And then Jesus tells us that a priest comes walking by. Now, a priest is a man of the cloth. And of course you would expect a priest to be compassionate and kind. But notice I didn't say Elios, because you see that this priest has nothing to forgive. As far as we know, the Jewish man lying alongside of the road hasn't offended the priest in any way, so he can't be Elios. But you would expect him to be compassionate, like I would be to Matt, or kind. But he can't be Elios. But amazingly enough, Jesus tells us this priest walks on by. And then he tells us that a Levite comes. Now, a Levite, we would say, is like an associate minister. So he's a man of the cloth, too. And you would expect this man of the cloth, again, to at least be compassionate and kind. But again, not Elios, because as far as we know, the Jewish man lying alongside of the road has done nothing to this Levitical priest. So there's nothing to forgive. There's nothing to cancel out. But amazingly, Jesus tells us that this Levite, this man of the cloth, has no compassion, has no sympathy, has no kindness for his fellow human being, his fellow Jew, his fellow brother. And then Jesus tells us that a Samaritan comes. Now that man has a bone to pick with the Jews. I mean, the Jews were out downright mean and nasty to the Samaritans. They called them half-breeds, spiritual sellouts. They called them goyim. They called them Gentile dogs. I mean, they said that the Samaritans were the scum of the earth. This Samaritan had every reason to dislike and intensely hate this Jew who's bleeding on the roadside. He had every reason to think, great, that Jew is getting exactly what he deserves. But Jesus surprises us. He says that Samaritan gets off his donkey and he begins to wash the Jewish man. He begins to bandage his wounds. And then he does the unthinkable. He picks up this Jewish man. He places him on his donkey. He takes him to an innkeeper. And he says, I'll pay you whatever it takes to make sure this man is restored to health. And that is Elios. That is Elios. That is what Jesus is asking us to do here. Do you know what that would be like? I was trying to think, what exactly could I compare that to? That would be like a Jew during the World War II seeing, can you imagine this? A Nazi SS officer lying there on the side of the road, dead and wounded. Can you imagine? He would have every reason. Perhaps he's even had a family member who was murdered in one of the concentration camps. He has every reason to hate him. And can you imagine this Jew taking him and picking him up, bringing him to his house and nursing him to his health? That's Elios. I want you to understand that is what Jesus is asking each one of us to do if we are believers, if we are followers of him. I'd like to close with this true story as we move to communion this morning, perhaps maybe to make this point even more powerful. Tex Watson, Skip, can you put up his picture? Tex Watson is perhaps a man you are not familiar with. Tex Watson was a member of the Charles Manson family. He was part of that fateful night when Sharon Tate was murdered. Do you remember, in Hollywood? And the La Bianca parents were also murdered on that night. In fact, I believe a television special is coming out highlighting that fateful evening. One day, Tex Watson had a woman visitor come to visit him in jail. He had no idea who she was. She sat down, he sat down at a table, and the one said, you know, Mr. Watson, I heard that you've become a believer, a follower of Jesus Christ. Is that true? I just had to hear it for myself. I just had to see it for myself. And Tex Watson looked down, he stumbled around for a moment, he said, well, yes, it is true. I've become a follower of Jesus Christ. I've given my life to Jesus Christ. I've repented of my sins, and I am now doing and everything I can to follow him, even here in this prison. And the woman then said, you know, and she began to tell a little bit about herself. And she said, you know, when I was very young, my parents were tragically killed. And she said, I grew up bitter, and I just grew up so angry at God. In fact, I just hated God. And then the woman said, you know, one day a friend of mine introduced me to a person. His name was Jesus Christ. And she told me about his love. She told me about his mercy. She told me about his grace. And I reached out like that woman with the issue, but I reached out in faith. And I latched on to that because I was so empty. And she said I was so full of rage and so full of bitterness. And I begged Jesus to forgive me of my sin. But most of all, I said, Jesus, deliver me of this bitterness that is just consuming me. And it's just destroying my life. And there was silence for a moment. A pregnant silence. And then the woman looked Tex Watson straight in the eyes and she said, you know, it's a miracle, Mr. Watson, that I'm here. Because what you don't know is that my name before I was married was La Bianca. You murdered my parents. And Tex Watson, a huge, strapping man, just broke down and began to weep. Weep like he's never wept before. I mean, he wept so much that the woman began to cry herself. And through her tears, she looked at Tex Watson. She said, the reason why I came here, Mr. Watson, was because I knew I needed to forgive you. I knew I needed to release you from your prison, and I want you to know I forgive you for murdering my parents. And I want you to know at that very moment when that woman did that, she opened up her very soul to receive incredible mercy and grace of God, and she was set free. What a contrast, though, to Sharon Tate's mother. Sharon Tate's mother went to an early grave. She was consumed with the anger and the bitterness that had occurred because her daughter was just brutally murdered. And she drank herself to death to an early grave. Skip, can you put up Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 17? In Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 17 it says this, the merciful man does himself good, but the cruel man does himself harm. Blessed are when you are merciful, for you shall obtain mercy. Which one are you? The unmerciful person, still full of bitterness, still harboring bitterness and unforgiveness? Or have you experienced the love and the forgiveness of Jesus Christ like that woman, and now you're free? If you're free, you're ready to take communion. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be gracious to you. Most of all, I do pray he gives you a merciful heart, because then you shall obtain mercy. God bless you and thank you.